Good evening, you're watching Bharat Voice. I'm Ritika Acharya, and we are live from Bangalore in South India. Now, the current situation, the current critical situation in Afghanistan has got a lot of people thinking, it's got a lot of people confused about the future of Afghanistan and about the uncertainties and the dangers that lie ahead in dealing and in engaging with an extremist organization. And that is why we've named our discussion today the Afghanistan Conundrum. To talk about this, we have two eminent guests with us today. Number one, we have with us Dr. Maxim Shuchkov, who's from Moscow, Russia. He's the director at the MO University, and he's also the member of the Russian think tank RIAC, that is Russian International Affairs Council from Moscow. And we have with us Dr. Panda, Dr. Jagannath Panda, who is the author of a book on India-China relations, and he's also an East Asia expert. He's also the member of Manohar Parikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Thank you, both of you, and thank you for taking our time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So my first question is to both of you. The opening remarks and first question is obviously about USA. Do you think that first, Dr. Maxim, to you? Do you think that the abrupt exit of USA? Do you think it was more of a strategic exit, or was it an exit which was rather to pacify the domestic fronts?
Well, first of all, I have to say I don't see the U.S. Exit from Afghanistan as a strategic mistake or having any strategic impact on U.S. foreign policy, but it definitely was a tactical blunder. And the way it was organized and the way they let many of the regional allies down, including Afghan government and India and many others. I think definitely Joe Biden is in a way been continuing Trump's policy, and there's definitely a drive in the United States to reorient resources towards what they see a new great power rivalry with China and partly with Russia. And that said, I think that the U.S. is now militarily gone, but it does not mean they perhaps will limit their intelligence capabilities. And as the chief of the CIA said, they do want to maintain intelligence capabilities. And in that sense, I think the U.S. presence will be felt, at least for Russia and China and perhaps India as well.
All right. So, Dr. Panda, Dr. Maxim here says that U.S. is probably militarily gone, but strategically still going to be very much there. What do you think? This was a strategic exit, or was this an exit to pacify the domestic fronts? Or do you think, Dr. Panda, that this whole abrupt exit has really caused a lot of lack of trust in USA, and everyone's now talking about that? You can't trust USA with much now, and there's a lot of discussion around it. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it was a mixture of both the things. It was a strategic, thoughtful exit, and also it is also partly a kind of reflection of what's going on domestically within the United States. Partly, I would say that it is a strategic exit from the point of view, if we try to understand from the American foreign policy planning under Joe Biden. If we talk about Joe Biden's foreign policy, yes, I do agree with Dr. Maxim that it is largely a continuation of President Trump's active foreign policy, and this foreign policy focus is more towards Indo-Pacific, and this foreign policy contestation is more towards China, and to some extent also it is aimed towards China and Russia in the Eurasian regions. So therefore it was a thoughtful strategic exit in terms of focusing more on a revisionist China, and also China's emerging partnership with a range of countries in the regions that is actually challenging the US foreign policy. So it was a thoughtful strategic exit to some point. But if you try to understand from the domestic point of view, I think it is also a thoughtful exit to the point that if we try to understand from economic point of view, the American foreign policy and the economic situation within US has been, not in a very good situation for some time. This is what President Trump was trying to, gain ground by advocating that American economy needs to come to proper shape in order to meet a challenging China internationally, and also within country they need to rejuvenate their economy in order to meet the demand of the people. But more than that, I think this domestic and international thing has a clear linkages with the US foreign policy, to the extent that if we see, the Americans have more than 1,000 smaller or bigger military stationing points and establishment all across the Indo-Pacific regions. So a troops, stationing in Taliban, and troops positioning in Northeast Asia, in the Korean Peninsula, with Japan, is a huge cost for the American economy. So I think it is a mixture of both. That's why they thought to withdraw troops, but the withdrawal of the troops not necessarily mean that America is gone from Afghanistan. American security presence is still very much there. There's still a significant power to reckon with.
Dr. Maxim, do you have something to add to that? To what Dr. Pandit just
Well,
said?
no, I think I'll just add one thing, that perhaps the drawdown from Afghanistan ends the era that began in U.S. foreign policy following 9/11, where a bulk of their strategic thinking was focused on counterterrorism activities and stuff, and now they're kind of that is in a way a difficult enemy, external enemy to fight, because global terrorism is such a large phenomenon. It's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But and now having a kind of a clearer adversary in the form of China and partly Russia kind of helps U.S. to collect resources, and as my colleague said, to refocus on other priorities. But the countries that are affected significantly by the situation in Afghanistan, and I mean Russia and India, each in their own capacity, merely cannot afford neglect the issue of potential, rising terrorist activity in the region, and in this sense, basically do have to do a lot more bilateral coordination, which has already been taking place, and also kind of our own actions to secure our borders and our internal state of society.
All right. So we'll come to the extremist bit as well, and we'll come to the bilateral relations as well in a bit. I'll come to that question. But again, my question is now about after USA's exit. My question is obviously directly about India. Do you think that, Dr. Maxim, India? There's been a lot of discussions, and a lot of experts are now claiming that India has lost a lot of leverage in the region, and therefore there could be like issues for India, and India has to watch out for quite a lot. What do you have to say about that?
Of course, we have to see how the situation evolves. From what we have seen now, it appears that Pakistan emerges as one of the winners of the current situation, and Russia and India are in some ways are relative losers, perhaps losers in the sense that they are now more vulnerable to the threat issues coming out from Afghanistan. In that case, I'm not sure if India has lost the leverage. I mean, in a way, it will have definitely need to restore its position and secure its borders, including through cooperation, perhaps with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but also with Russia on some aspects. So we'll see how it plays out. But definitely, if you look at it from whether India is now more secure, like I said before, both Russia and India are less secure these days, and we'll have to deal with this situation.
Okay, Dr. Maxim, just to add a little bit there, could you share some details about, there was a recent meeting that held between the NSA, India NSA, Ajit Doval, and also between the Security Council head Patrushev, and what could have been the likely outcome of that meeting, or possible outcomes of such meetings in future as well? What can we expect?
Well, look, I obviously I would love to be a fly on the wall in that meeting. I wasn't there. I don't have any classified insights. But one thing that emerged and that many observers in Russia have spotted following that meeting is some relative, I don't know if we can call it a shift, but some interesting amendment of the Russian position, right? In the few days, even weeks after the Taliban took power in Afghanistan, many were puzzled, including in this country, by some of the comments the Russian ambassador to Afghanistan made, that Afghanistan may be now even more secure, and the Taliban are bringing more security than the Afghan government. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said that Russia is not, jumping before everyone else to legitimize the Taliban, or because obviously the Taliban are recognized as a terrorist organization in Russia since early 2000s. But the Taliban extended invitation to the inauguration of the new government to Russia and China, and many kind of had these caveats that whether Russia is going to prop up the new Taliban forces. And it was interesting that Kremlin's press secretary Peskov, right after this meeting between Patrushev and an Indian counterpart, said that Russia A is not going to be attending inauguration ceremony of the Taliban. B, it is not very happy with the makeup of the new government because, quote unquote, it wasn't inclusive now. Of course, I understand that this inclusive is now a word everyone is throwing around. Is a kind of a euphemism to show that people are not very happy with what's going on in Kabul these days. But still, so on the one hand, I think Russia is now pursuing a double track policy. One being quote unquote normal relations with the Taliban, coming from the understanding that they're the new power in the country, so you have to deal with them whether you see them as a terrorist organization or not. But secondly, beefing up militarily its borders in Central Asia, and also propping up its allies in Central Asia, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, partly Uzbekistan, having military drills in this country. So, in a nutshell, it's hoping for the best, but it's still it may be expecting the worst.
Okay. Dr. Panda, I have to ask you the same question about India, because again, a lot of discussions started right after we saw the abrupt exit when it was taking place, that, India has lost a lot of money. People started talking about numbers, $1 billion or something India has lost. We put in so much money, what's going to happen to it, the investments. India has already said directly, indirectly that, we don't want to directly engage with the Taliban. We'll take our time. India, do you think, has always played the very balancing act? India has always played a very neutral role, and that's what it's going to do in the future as well, because we're just going to play the wait and watch game.
I think every international development or crisis really brings some kind of opportunities and challenges to major economies, major countries in the regions. So to that extent, I think Taliban's arrival in power definitely brings some challenges and some opportunities for India. Challenges in terms of that, yes, you are right. I think to the extent India has invested dearly in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades, more than 400 plus projects, those are definitely at stake, but definitely those are not really going to vanish. I think we might have a talking terms with the Taliban, and we have started already that. Many countries are talking to Taliban, and Taliban 2.0 are showing some kind of positive inclination towards engaging with the countries in the regions. So to that extent, there are both challenges and opportunities for India. But I think in terms of geopolitical context, what India should be worried about, that over the last 2 decades, India was continuously trying to have an alternative route to Central Asia. We know that given our problem with China, given our problem with Pakistan, India was trying to reach hard to Iran and Afghanistan and trying to have an alternative way towards Central Asia. And I think there might be some setback about that planning. We might have to talk in deliberate terms with the Taliban, negotiate the terms and conditions, and try to prepare our ground in terms of our future planning towards not only towards the region, to the country, but also finding a alternative route towards the Central Asia. The other factor is, I think, the terrorism and the extremism factor. I mean, we know for a fact that Taliban has been not only a problem for India, but for many countries, including China in the regions. The extremist element within the Taliban, setup, that needs to be tackled. That needs to be discussed not only with the Taliban, interim government directly, but at the regional level, at the multilateral level, including at the UN level, to ensure that Taliban extremist groups do not really engage into any kind of radical activities causing terrorist or extremist incidents in the regions. And I think one more incident that we need to be really mindful about, the possible troika that might emerge. The troika that might emerge between China, Pakistan, and Taliban. So far, what we have seen is that India has been cornered and probably faced a lot of challenges on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir from both China and Pakistan. They have clubbed together to pressurize India from time to time. China has created problems on the boundary dispute. Pakistan has been engaged in the sponsoring terrorism, cross-border terrorism, and I think here we need to ensure the Taliban, which has been engaged in an extremist activities, they should not have a say on the territorial matters. And I think this is what India needs to ensure, that we cannot allow another country or a third country to emerge as a as a third factor to emerge and to have a say on the boundary dispute or on the territorial issue. So there are multiple challenges emerging for India, but as you could see, Dr. Jaishankar and the government of India has shown a positive approach towards the Taliban. There has been some rounds of talk have already happened, and I think we should also see it as a new development in terms of creating opportunity and try to engage with the Taliban government to take advantage in the region.
Dr. Partner, since you say that we can't afford, India can't afford having a country which is like a third emerging power there, and therefore controlling, dominating the discussions there, I have to obviously ask you there that you're talking about what about China? Do you think that India is going to very closely be watching what China is going to do or is already doing in Afghanistan? And therefore, India is, on the other hand, India also has a close friend ally in Russia as well in Afghanistan. So there's a little bit of relief there.
That's an interesting point, Ritika. In fact, I've written recently on China and Taliban. And I think here what we need to see is that two things. One is that to what extent the Chinese government is entering into a kind of deal or agreement in terms of their outreach in Afghanistan. That needs to be seen. That needs to be seen not only from India's point of view, but also from Russian point of view and also from a range of regional perspective. We must remind our readers here, viewers here, that China did not actually acknowledge the Taliban government when it actually came to power from 1996 to 2001. So today, whether China is eventually acknowledging the interim government or the Taliban government, which will be really formulating in Afghanistan, that needs to be seen. What kind of agreement they will have, because the Chinese acknowledgement will hold a lot of legitimacy, because China is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and therefore we need to, that actually brings a little bit of a opportunity for both India and Russia, because India and Russia need each other at this point more than at any other point. In fact, both India and Russia not only have a strong bilateral relationship, which is more security and defense centric, but also in the multilateral forums, particularly in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there has to be a solid chemistry must emerge between India and Russia. And we must remind also to our viewers that Russia actually supported India's entry into the SCO. China was not really very forthcoming. And today, what we see, if Pakistan has been been made a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that is primarily because of the support of China. So I think this is a very well orchestrated ground for India and Russia to talk about a future possibility of cooperation, not only at the bilateral level, but also on a range of multilateral level, including at the UN, in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in BRICS, where India and Russia are critical powers, and also in range of other multilateral institutions, including United Nations, where we need to support each other on counterterrorism, on a range of economic issues, as well as on the regional architecture, security architecture issues.
All right, Dr. Maxim, I have to get you there. Do you think that USA having left Afghanistan has created like a very comfortable vacuum now for China and Russia, and therefore that vacuum is going to be very happily and very comfortably be filled by Russia and China? Also, how do you think that Russia is going to be dealing with China in Afghanistan?
Well, I think when we talk about potential of filling up the vacuum, I would not necessarily place Russia and China in the same category, because Russia does not have any opportunities to pursue in Afghanistan. When the Taliban delegation was in Moscow in July, there were four major kind of red lines, or the four major issues that Russia wanted to ensure the Taliban deliver upon. That the potential instability in Afghanistan does not spill over to Central Asia. Second, that there is no ISIS or other global jihadist organizations hosted in Afghanistan that maybe threaten Russian and Central Asian territory. The drug trafficking and the safety of the diplomatic missions, right? So the Taliban have been providing for the fourth. Now the Russian diplomatic mission has been in full operation in Afghanistan, but there's still three other very important things that we need to see how they play out. And neither of the four issues basically are in the category of opportunities, right? These are in the category of threats. Whereas the Chinese are pursuing a rather kind of opportunistic policy in the sense that they have some economic stakes. They eye Afghanistan for investment. Afghanistan is important for the success of their One Belt, One Road initiative, many other things. So they definitely have more of opportunities to pursue there than the Russians do, at least as it seems now.
Okay. All right. Since you mentioned drug trafficking, I also have to ask you about drug trafficking in the region. Do you think that, both of you, Dr. Maxim first, do you think that increased drug trafficking is going to now fund more jihadist activities, more extremist activities across the globe?
This is, of course, a serious challenge for Russia, but also Russia here is both a quote-unquote recipient of all the drug trafficking activity, but also as a transfer route because it goes further to European quote-unquote market. Definitely, to tackle this threat, one needs to have genuine interstate cooperation, including with many governments in Central Asia. There's a lot of corruption that contributes to the spread of drug trafficking there. But eventually, like I said, the Taliban promised that they will deal with this issue. But we have to be realistic and see that any government, and including the government of the Taliban, dealing and operating in such a poor and challenged country as Afghanistan right now, will eventually need money. We see some of the Gulf monarchies are coming with potential money, but some international donors, also the Europeans, are kind of reluctant to give more money after all these years, and it seems to be all the money is going to waste. So I think obviously the Taliban will have to govern the country, not just conquer it, which they have pretty close to zero experience in government, and let alone successful governance of the country. And they will need money. If they don't have money for their activities, they will have to make this money. And opium is definitely, and heroin and other drugs are obviously the easiest source of income. So I think even though there might be these promises that they will tackle the events on the ground, may even push them to pursue this track. But again, it is just kind of in the category of me trying to analyze all possible challenges here.
And also the question of radicalization then comes in here, because do you think that this is also now going to radicalization in Afghanistan is also going to lead to more terror activities around Russia as well? Because let's say in Uzbek and Tajik and other countries as well, and that's a challenge for Russia.
It definitely is. It has been a challenge. There's also been this kind of psychological aspect that even though ISIS and the Taliban are different extremist groups and with different scope and different ideologically, for many radicals around the globe, this is just 50 shades of green and black, and what they didn't succeed at in, say, in Syria and in Iraq, this kind of construction of Islamist emirate, may be seen as a success in Afghanistan, and that may kind of galvanize or agitate many people who pursue these kind of radical ideologies in Central Asia, but also inside Russia itself. So it is one thing that I would say Moscow is very concerned about. And the second thing, that there is no, given the nature kind of Central Asian regimes, most of them are pretty autocratic governments, there is no kind of civil opposition to ruling elites, but there might emerge a religious or quasi-religious opposition that may be fueled by the Taliban or by the forces that reside in Afghanistan. So this is also kind of a midterm / long-term challenge which Russia is seriously concerned about.
All right, Russia is seriously concerned about. Dr. Panda, I have to ask you about China now because, again, the same problem, radicalization in Afghanistan, do you think that is going to cause some sort of a challenge for China, especially in the Xinjiang province as well? Because, again, there's a discussion about China. On one hand, it deals with the Uyghur Muslims in China in the way it does. But on the other hand, it's, happily engaging with Taliban. What do you have to say? Dr. Panda, can you hear me?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. So should
Hello.
I repeat my question to you? Are you there, sir? Should I repeat my question to you?
Yes. Can you please repeat your question, please?
Sure. So I was saying that do you think that the same problem now is with China as well? Radicalization, increased radicalization in Afghanistan is going to be a challenge for China in the Xinjiang district as well. Because, on one hand, China deals with the Uyghurs Muslim in China in the way it does. And on the other hand, it's happily engaging with the Taliban in Afghanistan. What do you have to
Oh,
say?
yes, definitely. I think
Or
China's.
just to add there, or do you think that Taliban is going to happily not interfere, not meddle in the affairs of China because what it needs is money?
I think it will be premature to expect that the Taliban will be all good to China and the Taliban-China relationship is very stable. I don't think so. I don't think we need to reach to that conclusion so early. Yeah, and therefore, I think we need to have a comprehensive understanding about China's approach towards Taliban, what it has been, and what it is going to be. In 1996, when Taliban came to power, the Chinese actually, kept on staying engaged with them very closely, but they didn't provide the recognition. They did not really acknowledge the Taliban government, primarily because the Taliban China could not really arrive at a conclusion, and the Taliban could not actually assure China that they are not they are going to delink their association from the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region. So China's traditional concern about the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region, particularly about the ETIM group, East Turkmenistan Islamic movement group, is a primary concern for China, and that is going to still continue as a concern. I don't think there will be a imminent agreement or an understanding today between the Taliban government, interim government, and China to finish this or to delink the Taliban's linkages, abruptly from the Uyghur community. These linkages is there for many decades, and I think this is a very stable nexus. So I think it will take some time for the Chinese to convince the Taliban government, and the Taliban government would also like to enter into a deal or a kind of nexus with the Chinese government in terms of gaining financially and trying to have some kind of a good chemistry before really committing something. So I don't think China is going to be safe so soon with the arrival of Taliban. The other factor that needs to be understood is that even though in recent years the Chinese government has given a picture to the outside world that Xinjiang is really under control of the Chinese government, and there is a lot of development is taking place in Xinjiang. In actuality, that is not the case. The Chinese government is really serious about the Uyghurs going out of the hand. Their extremist elements and their radical elements, particularly ETIM group, will carry out some violent activities against the Chinese people. And in fact, the Chinese government is still worried about Rabia Qadir and Rabia Qadir's association, and given the strong linkages that Uyghur communities has with the Taliban groups, including with some of the Central Asian organizations. So I don't think the Chinese government has got absolute control, and more importantly, Xi Jinping administration is more confident about Xinjiang problem yet. So I think it will take them some time before they really enter into a kind of understanding with the Taliban government. So we should not draw this premature conclusion that there is everything good about Taliban China when Taliban has come to power.
Right. Dr. Maxim, that's a very interesting point Dr. Panna made there. But would you like to add something in terms of Russia with the Taliban? Would be a similar situation?
Well, possible. I mean, of course, that's why I think we've seen different, you know, tactics and also different channels of communication, I would have to say, because we have a presidential envoy, kind of a primary person that does all the coordination of Russia's Afghanistan policy, Ambassador Kabulov. But also we've seen the Russian ambassador in Afghanistan on the ground, but also we see the national security chief, Patrushev, and others. So we see different people kind of tasked with different things or different aspects of the Afghan policy to see what may fly best in the current circumstances. But also I think Moscow has been pretty cautious in going too far or going you know, running forward with certain activities.
Okay, all right. I'm going to ask my final question to both of you, and I'll take the final word first. I'll start with Dr. Panda. Dr. Panda, how do you think the India-China relations are now shaping up after the Galwan incident? And do you think that, I asked you this earlier, but I have to focus you a little bit more. Do you think that India is still going to be wary of China in Afghanistan?
I think, as we know, that after the Galwan incident, India-China relationship has entered into a very dynamic, situation, and the Galwan incident was definitely a turning point to that effect. But I think with Taliban coming to power, the Chinese would like to monitor the situation, how they can create more problems with India on the boundary issues, pressurize India more, and probably try to have a broader regional nexus against India with the cooperation of Pakistan and Taliban. But at this moment, I don't think the Chinese are clear how the situation is going to be advantageous to them and how the Chinese could use it to their advantage in terms of pressurizing India. But I could clearly see on three specific issues the Chinese would have upper hand when it comes to the boundary relations and relationship with India. One, probably the Chinese would definitely like to, take advantage of a situation where they would like to invest in a troika relationship with Pakistan and Taliban, trying to create a regional environment which is against India, particularly on the Jammu and Kashmir issue. So I think India needs to take into account that factor. The second point is that I think we need to also see to what extent the Chinese are also trying to push forward their Belt and Road Initiative in Afghanistan, because we know that Belt and Road Initiative is not really limited to one particular geographical region. It has a very interlinked nexus with many parts of the world. So China entering into a better Belt and Road power in Afghanistan is definitely not a good news for India, because it will have some linkages with China-Pakistan economic corridor. It will have some connections with the Himalayan regions, and there India needs to be really careful about. The third aspect, I think, what India needs to be really careful, and I think the Chinese might pressurize India, and that might have implications for India-China relations, is that probably the Chinese would also try to, promote a regional nexus with countries like Turkey, countries like Iran, and factoring countries like Russia. So I think India needs to ensure that most of these countries, including Russia, should not really be engaged with a anti-India environment in the regions. And I think that aspect needs to be ensured from India if we really see it purely in China-India context.
Very, very interesting, Dr. Panda. But just to add there a little bit, do you think that so far what India has done, do you think you're happy with what India has done so far, how India has dealt with the situation so far, or we're lacking somewhere, we need to do a little bit more?
I think we have done absolutely a very judicious, thing that we have started talking to the Taliban, and I think this is needed. Even though we have started, on the one hand, we have started talking to the Taliban, we are still monitoring the situation closely, and we are having a wait and watch policy, and that's what most of the powers in the regions are doing with that, including the Chinese. So I think we are on board, and we are on the right path. But each one of these developments in Afghanistan will need, continuous vigilance and continuous monitoring. So I think Indian foreign policy will be tested from time to time. But I think so far so good. We have received the situation well. We have talked to the Taliban. We have kept our foreign policy door open, and we have a very open approach towards the developments that is taking place in the Afghanistan region.
All right, fair enough. Dr. Maxim, I have to ask you the final question, and I'll have to request to talk just a little bit louder. Since Dr. Panda also mentioned Turkey, India's relations with Turkey, do you think, my question to you is about Russia. How are Russia's relation with Qatar, Turkey, and Pakistan? And also, it's been seen that Russia's already been taking a little bit of a tough stance with Pakistan there. And what do you have to say about President Putin and President Putin's relationship with Narendra Modi, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and therefore future possible good bilateral relationship between Russia and India?
Well, that's a whole separate. That's a lot of questions for a whole separate discussion. But I'll say that briefly, Russia's relations with Qatar and Turkey have evolved dramatically ever since the start of the Russian campaign in Syria. Before that, relations with Qatar were terrible. Now Russia is a factor in the Middle East that many powers in the Middle East cannot ignore, whether they like it or not. So I would say relations with Qatar have been on the rising trajectory. So are with Turkey. With Turkey, it's been kind of a mixed bag. There's this, in my view, what I call a dialectics of fragility and flexibility. On the one hand, kind of historical rivalry makes and difference of interest make this relationship very fragile. On the other hand, there is a chemistry between Putin and Erdogan, and kind of an overlap of what I would call the grand idea that both Russia and Turkey strive for greater de-Westernization of international relations. So far, it has kept the relationship afloat. But I would say that many people in Moscow are aware that any security deal with Turkey are like getting a mortgage. You may settle your housing issue, but the interest rate and monthly payment will always keep you alert. With Pakistan, it's very interesting because there is this historic side of things and the importance of Pakistan to Russia, but also the two very important restraints, which is one, obviously, Russia's wanting to have better relations with India, and it has to walk very carefully with Pakistan here. But the other one is also that over the recent years, the Chinese have developed a stronger grip on Pakistan economy, investments, and many other things. So there are not so many opportunities, I would say, with Pakistan today. But the security element is obviously a strong one and a prominent one. As far as Russia's relations with India is concerned, very quickly, there is this, of course. I started with this idea, and we'll finish with this idea. If we're talking that now we're entering an era of the quote-unquote new great power rivalry, there is this view in Moscow that India will be, if not the key, but a key to the solution of this rivalry between China and the United States. Obviously, Russia would not want for India to become a new kind of West Germany in American contest with the United States. Speaking kind of the role of West Germany played in containing the Soviet Union in the Cold War. But Russia's idea, but on the other hand, Russia, of course, has less to offer for India than does the United States. But Russia's grand idea, I would say, for India and for other countries that find it uncomfortable to take side, whether you are for the United States or for China, is kind of develop your own strategic sovereignty, and especially in the area of digital and other technology. Because we in Moscow, many believe that it will be actually one area where the future of the great power rivalry will be resolved, technology. And of course, in this sense, both Russia and India can become kind of leaders of digital non-alignment movement, if we can call it this way. So I think there is this one huge area that still has many rich potential for future exploration, but we'll see whether and how governments in both Moscow and New Delhi are able to take advantage of it.
All right. I would have, let you go today with the last question, but there are a couple of live questions coming in, and I have to take one. One is about Pakistan, and I have to ask both of you: what does Pakistan have to lose and gain from this whole Taliban situation now? What is Russia's view, and what is India's view? Dr. Panda first.
I think Pakistan is also in a very tight situation. It's not everything rosy for Pakistan as it appears to be. For many decades, Pakistan has actually harbored and nurtured the extremist and the radical groups, particularly who are engaged in the terrorist activities. So Taliban coming to power not necessarily means that the Pakistan administration or the Pakistan government will have an absolute control over the Taliban government. So I think the Pakistanis will be worried. The second point is that I think what the Pakistanis would be really worried is that whether there will be an international, coalition will be emerging against Pakistan, which will demand for a thorough investigation about the radical groups that are there within the Pakistani territories. So I think Pakistan is also in a very challenging, position today, even though it looks that they enjoy the maximum advantage as far as the Taliban groups are concerned. The other issue is that I think what India should do is that we need to ensure to the world, like what we have been doing for many years till now, is that we need to provide valid ground and create appropriate occasions for the international environment and communities to believe that it was Pakistan all this year. It has nurtured these radical groups. If we can do that, that will actually that will strengthen our position internationally in terms of fighting the counter-terrorism and in terms of our outreach towards the other regions, including the Afghanistan region and Middle East region.
Dr. Maxim, do you agree with Dr. Pana where he says that it looks like Pakistan has the maximum advantage in this Taliban situation in Afghanistan, and also do you think that Pakistan has something to worry about Tehreek-e-Taliban?
Well, yes, I would say that definitely we've had advisor to Pakistani Prime Minister talk on the Russian Central Television the other day, and it was clear from his remarks that Pakistan has many caveats with the current makeup in Afghanistan, and thinking that the Taliban or some factions of the Taliban who are fighting the Pakistani military, but there are others who are in Kabul in the Afghan government. Who may either grow to independent or willing to be more independent from the Pakistan influence. So that is one thing that I believe worries Islamabad right now. But there is other thing which I kind of echoes what Dr. Pandey said, is that many countries in the West may, instead of shaming Pakistan for its support of the organizations deemed terrorist, see it as a key to stabilizing Afghanistan. For example, the Europeans who are really reluctant to invest anymore, or who see Afghanistan as more kind of a burden, they're looking for easy solutions in kind of outsourcing their foreign policy to some major regional power that can settle all these problems for them, and Pakistan is definitely the first that comes to mind. And I think to some degree Pakistan will be playing that card that Turkey has played with refugees coming from Syria and Libya and other countries in the Middle East, playing that card with Europeans, asking for more money to keep the Afghan migrants in the region, and instead of going to Europe. So I think there are some opportunities that Pakistan may actually explore and be pretty successful in this situation.
Dr. Maxim, we didn't get your views enough on the matter about Russians' views about Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What do you think about Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India?
Well, I think many believe he is kind of in the same category of strong nationalist-oriented leaders such as President Putin himself. Definitely, he's assessed as likely to stay in power for some time. He's seen as consolidating power around him. Some believe it's a negative trend given the nature of the Indian power structure, and history, and tradition. Others believe it's a good trend given that there a lack of leadership in the world generally, and especially the lack of leadership in the Western societies. Now you see kind of strong powers or strong leaders emerging roughly from the East, and by East here I also mean in some degree President Putin and Erdogan and Modi, Xi Jinping, and many others. So he's and definitely this type of political leaders is very comfortable, I would say, for Moscow to deal with, because they're predictable in trying to pursue their country's national interests. They're more interest focused than value focused, and they mean real deal. Bluntly talking, when you deal with them, they mean business.
All right. With that, I can actually go on, and there's so many more questions coming in for Dr. Panda and for Dr. Maxim as well, but I've already kept you for both you guests for quite some time now. On that note, I'm going to end today's interview. Thank you so much to both of you for taking out your valuable time today, taking out your precious time and, answering all the valuable and pertinent questions. Thank you, Dr. Maxim, for joining with us from Moscow. And thank you so much, Dr. Panda.
Thank you.
Thank you.